Hey everybody! Thanks again for following me at MW headquarters, where I'll be, sharing musical content. And I'm very, very excited to start a new component of this Instagram page, which is going to be a album and review. I could call it a vinyl review, but I'm not sure what entails a difference between listening to an album, streaming it, or CD or vinyl, unless I'm going to describe like when the pops are on my record player, or how intimate it sounds on vinyl compared, because I don't, I do believe there's a difference in the audio experience, but not enough to justify saying it's a vinyl review. I'm really just reviewing albums, but how I'm gonna do it, how I'm gonna organize it, is that I am going to base it around vinyls that I have, at least to start. I'm gonna move through most of the vinyl records I have, and discuss the records and things of that nature. Um, so I'm starting with the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. I thought it was appropriate for me to start with a Bob Dylan album, being that he's my favorite songwriter and biggest influence in becoming a songwriter myself. And also on a sonic level, what I do is related to this kind of sound and aesthetic. Um, the funny thing about me is that most of the music I listen to is bands, rock and roll bands. And I actually don't really listen much anymore to acoustic soloists or just plain soloists and any guys. I listen to a lot of band stuff, but I've never been in a band myself. And part of my justification, in addition to, it's difficult to put a band together, and I'm like kind of well aware of how hard that is, and kind of the things that go into a band working, being such a specific alchemy of having an original sound, people willing to work together, and all the things you need to really stick with it and put in the 4, 5, 6 years of honing the sound and writing the songs. And a situation like that hasn't presented itself to me. And the other thing is, due to albums like these, Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen's early albums, and I actually do prefer his later albums. Just to kind of further the point I make, I prefer Leonard's keyboard-driven album when he was writing songs on the Casio, and doing various positions, and I'm Your Man before that, and I do prefer those to the acoustic albums. But the main thing I'm trying to say here, as I belabor the point and digress and make a million digressions, is that an album like the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan proves definitively that one person with an acoustic guitar and a microphone and recording equipment, and Dylan uses a harmonica actually, which I don't, but one person singing a song can have the impact, all the impact of a band, of any band, a big band, an orchestra, a standard rhythm guitar, bass, drum, rock band, 3 piece, 4 piece, keyboard. When a song works, one person singing it will work. I think it probably limits the potential audience you might garner, depending on how in fashion acoustic singer songwriter or solo electric songwriter material is. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a moment where it comes back into mainstream vogue, because that's just how music works. Certain sensibilities appeal to people at different times, and that kind of thing. So, and I was gonna actually mention early '70s was probably the last time the soloist songwriter, Cat Stevens, and Harry Chapin, getting a big, like a 8 album record contract, and great for him, obviously. That was maybe because Dylan really set the stage for that, And this work by Dylan set the stage for that, because as we know, he did go electric and become the rock star he wanted to be when he was a teenage boy in Hibbing, Minnesota, and he was envisioning a future for himself. He actually really more so took a detour into folk music opposed to detouring into rock music, because he really did want to be like Little Richard or Buddy Holly, and God bless him, he accomplished it in spades and actually revolutionized rock and roll. After it's interesting. I wouldn't quite say he revolutionized folk or acoustic singer songwriter in the way that he revolutionized rock and roll, because he brought the lyrical, poetic sensibility to rock and roll that I think you could argue hadn't been there. Not so much from the standpoint of having beautiful lyrics as there were in the 50s, and the arrangements were more spaced out and celestial and gorgeous, but more so just from the attitude standpoint, almost something preceding hip hop to a degree, where the authorial voice is so strong and you feel the same narrator from one song to the next on the same collage, experiencing the same collage of images, and the technique of stringing language together and rhyming words that you would never hear rhymed in other songs, and the surrealist aspect of what he was doing. All of that revolutionized rock and roll songwriting. But from an acoustic standpoint, I feel like he was just extremely skilled, and had a gift for not just using old melodies to write new lyrics, but having almost living in the melodies and living in the music and finding himself in the old to create something new. In a way that people really couldn't follow and duplicate. I think his rock and roll sound, not that people imitate Dylan, but I think his influence as a rock and roll songwriter is something that you can probably still hear today, and through the years of dense lyricism in rock and roll. Even someone like Stephen Malkmus, who you wouldn't say sounds like Bob Dylan vocally, but just what he does with a rock and roll song, like in the Jicks, writing like a 9-minute song about, reminiscent of like Edgar Allan Poe, and stuff. Takes you back to Bob Dylan mentioning Rue Morgue Avenue. They got a lot of hungry women there. Not talking about that album, but I feel Dylan on the acoustic songwriter side of things. It is really hard to duplicate for anyone to even kind of be in that air, so to speak. And I think you can throw anyone you want at me, Neil Young or whoever. I just think it's different. I just think the attitude he brought to it, holding an acoustic guitar and having a harmonica rack, and what he brought to that table, and with the melodies he used. The melodies he recycled into his own songs. But, I'm going to talk about Chronicles. I am going to talk about Chronicles as a part of this discussion a little later. But when he was in New York by himself, kind of developing as an artist, he would go to the library and read about the Civil War. And like that's an interesting thing for anyone to do, not just a songwriter. It's interesting that a 20-year-old or whatever, or 19-year-old, whatever he was at the time, as he was leading up to writing, his breakout album, like, why do that? Well, I think it's a person who wasn't locating or feeling a sense of himself reflected in mainstream contemporary culture to a significant degree. And someone, in order to understand himself, felt he needed to understand his culture and American history from a personal standpoint, and and understand his times by scrutinizing the past. And as he writes in Chronicles, especially pertaining to the Civil War, and as I'm saying, I think locating a sense of himself in the past is what is part of that approach, that energy, that intention, is why he's able to take, No More Auction Block and write Blown in the Wind. It's not just that he's a good writer, because that's like, we know that, like, it's simplistic to say. It's like how he did it and what his intention was, and that's the personalization of the lyrics and the sentiment that connects with people. A guy on an acoustic guitar, having the power of a rock and roll band, and that's part of how he did it. So, with that preamble out of the way, I do just want to talk about the album. It was recorded April, July, October, November, December 1962, and then there was another session in April of 1963, and that might have been the last couple of those sessions. Might have resulted in the altered track listing. The track listing that they ultimately rolled out was far superior than the first version of the album, which would have been, I think, still a breakthrough album, but not the cultural phenomenon that it became. And I don't think Dylan would have come out of that with the cachet that he did, with the adjustments that were made when they were made. Namely, as Wikipedia tells us, Girl from the North Country, Masters of War, Talkin' World War III Blues, and Bob Dylan's Dream were recorded during that last session. Now, this album without Girl from the North Country and Masters of War isn't the same album. It's still a very good album. It's still an album that has Blown in the Wind, a really killer Rocks and Gravel that was actually remixed to great effect on the True Detective soundtrack. It still has A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall. It has Let Me Die in My Footsteps, which is a solid song. It still has Karina, but especially, and it still has Don't Think Twice, It's Alright. So it's still a great album, but it doesn't have Girl from the North Country and Masters of War. Bob Dylan's Dream is a song I could go either way on. And I'm actually going to kind of talk about the songs now. For me, when you're encountering such an influential album, like an influential Beatles album, or an influential Bob Dylan's Rolling Stones, whoever you really, really enjoy, and people will be saying this about, or they're already thinking it about, albums like, Siamese Dream, Rock Doom Baby, and things of that nature, Machiavelli, Tupac, whatever great album you want to mention. It can be hard to kind of look at it objectively and kind of untangle the cultural import from what you're hearing and what you think about what you're hearing and how you would rate the album and stuff. Interesting thing about actually listening to this album, and this album was given to me by as a birthday present by my awesome girlfriend, love of my life, who helped me reorganize my vinyl record collection. I think very astutely noticed that this was a Dylan album that I didn't have, and the cover is amazing. I'm going to talk about the cover in a little bit, but when you actually do listen to this album, one of the interesting things is Dylan's assertiveness as an acoustic guitar player and his aggression as an acoustic guitar player on certain songs, especially the songs like Down the Highway, Bob Dylan's blues. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong. Yeah, Down the Highway, Bob Dylan's blues. Talking World War III blues to an extent. And I Shall Be Free, which is I would even go so far as to say it's abrasive. So um, I think what I'm trying to say is it's a very interesting album because it has these absolute stone cold classic songs that you recognize immediately if you're a fan of this genre and a fan of this artist. You know, Blowing in the Wind, Girl from the North Country, Masters of War, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. And then it has some minor works. Um, I don't want to say padding it out because they do a little bit more than that, and the performances are more enjoyable than that. But there's a real mix of tone, kind of the jokey folk talking song style, which is very present on "I Shall Be Free." And I think it really the mixture of tone really works well. Certain songs show a sense of humor, and there's a lightness and a breeziness in some of the performances. And then there's Karina, which just sounds fantastic, which is recorded with a band, and sounds great. My favorite song on the album is a Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. It's fantastic. Dylan had an ability to sense a culture on the precipice of something, and it's really a bit uncanny, given that the changes that were going to come. It really almost does feel prophetic to an extent. How was he able to do that? How was he able to feel that? The Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a time where there's going to be a lot of cultural upheaval, and there's a lot of tension in the air. Almost a sense of paranoia, a sense that the world has gone off the rails into total war in the very recent past and could happen again. We could be looking at mutually assured destruction and things of this nature. And to synthesize all that angst into these songs, into kind of a statement of here's what I'm feeling, and it might be what you're feeling too. And doing that and having that almost Midwest person, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the sense that you can have, this would be a conversation you might strike up with someone like Dylan at the bar at Kettle of Fish about the state of the world, and have that sensibility while also writing very poetic lyrics is quite an accomplishment from a songwriting standpoint. And I think the lighter songs facilitate that communication. Even though I'm not going to sit here and tell you I love the songs, some of the songs, but as an overall experience, it hangs together very, very well. It doesn't feel, it's not jarring. You do feel like you're almost sitting in at a set at like Cafe Wah to a degree at times. And I do think it also shows that in the universality of A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, Blown in the Wind in particular, versus the talking folk feel of Bob Dylan's blues or Bob Dylan's Dream, I think you're already seeing someone who has one foot in the scene that they're in and totally living that life in the village, as we know he did, with people like Dave Von Ronk and a host of others. Dave Von Ronk was more of like a mentor figure to him, I would imagine. I would I would interpret from what he's written about the time period. So you have he's doing that thing that even other artists are doing, and he's doing it in his original Bob Dylan way. But those songs don't necessarily hint at this unbelievable ability to kind of tap into the consciousness of the culture. So I feel like already on his second album overall, and really his breakthrough album that made him a popular music star, you're already seeing an artist who has one foot in the world, kind of where he's generating an artistic identity and finding a community, more importantly, and being a very active member of that community. And he's already almost stepping out of it to an extent, and charting his own course, because he is doing things that other songwriters just aren't doing, arguably, and I'm not sure it's arguable. Other writers might have had the intention to do some of this stuff, but he's doing it on Columbia Records and releasing an album to a mass audience. So I already think, and I don't see, I haven't really seen this said about freewheeling, that in when I've come across critiques about it. I haven't seen it said a lot that I think there's already a tension between the songs of universality, very poetic songs of universality, and the kind of like in a song like Oxford Town, which is a straight ahead folk song. You're already seeing a tension between where he's going to end up and where he is, and that delineation occurring, which became literal with an electric guitar, but was actually already present, I think, in the songs, and almost in the personality, as if Dylan is using the scene he's fully invested in, not as somewhere to necessarily get comfortable and live the rest of his experience out, find a home, because he has no direction home, right? But more so using that scene as a jumping off point that he's eventually going to leave and go on to another area of experience and art and expression. And I think that's one of the most compelling things about Dylan. There's an interesting thing in Dylan's work, I think, where I feel like, when you listen to Leonard Cohen, to compare Dylan and Leonard Cohen, two of my favorite songwriters, Dylan's kind of aesthetic at times, it is moving. Like I'm saying, as if he's always on his way somewhere else, moving through a collage of experience and imagery, and on his way somewhere, especially as he's leading up to the Electric Trilogy. And then he stops. I do feel like he stops, and the songs become very different from that point forward. And I think there were times when he tried doing what he had done before in his early career, and it maybe wasn't the same. It was still really good. Like, I think Street Legal is a really good album, but it's not quite the same. But I think, like, the difference is there's a difference between encountering work that is masterly work that has been chipped and polished and almost like a fine sculpture, and it's very smooth, and that, I think, is the kind of work Leonard Cohen wanted to present. Dylan, there's a wonderfully ramshackle quality even to the best songs, and not so much on this album, because these are he had played these songs in the cafes and honed them in the cafes, but on later albums, on the Electric albums, the songs are being discovered in the studio, and there is a sense of movement, that you're on this ride. You are on this ride with him, and that's why I love the bootleg series so much, and the Cutting Edge and stuff like that, because you have even more of that sense that Dylan's almost like Jay-Z in the studio. Like I don't know if you've seen it, but you see him creating the song in the studio and not necessarily having the song done, but counting on some kind of process, some kind of inspiration, some kind of sense of having a jar and catching lightning and bottling it up. Or, you know, you know what I'm saying. Twisting the cap. And it doesn't always work. And I think that's also reflected in, their output. If you're talking about Cohen and Dylan, I think one artist's output was probably more consistent from just an overall quality standpoint at times. But when Dylan's working, there is that amazing sense of someone on the move. And, as Allen Ginsberg said, I think it was on the Don't Look Back, but Dylan, he basically said Dylan's movement, his energy of movement, his wisp-like nature, is so much of his it's so much of his embodiment, and and when he brings that into the artistic process, it's very exciting. It's very exciting to listen to. It's like going to a 4-star studio film that's going to win the Oscar, and it totally works, and the bigness of it and the excitement of it, and the third act totally clicks, and it's high art, but it doesn't have that kind of like extremely scrutinized self-reflective quality. It's more a passing dream or something like that, and I love that about Dylan. So I think that's what I have to say about the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Of course, whenever I talk about Dylan, I end up talking about a million different things except for the one album that I'm actually reviewing. This cover is I kind of hate the word iconic because I feel like it's overused, but it's a bit iconic. And that's Suze Rotolo, who was Dylan's girlfriend in the early 60s in Greenwich Village. And I want to finish by reading a passage from Chronicles that I hope will further, hopefully illuminate like what I've been saying about his artistic development and his conscious attempt to, find new realms of expression and discover, opposed to perfect what's there. I mean, every writer who's serious about their craft is always growing, but Dylan's kind of adventurous sense of discovery is very much reflected in the passage I'm going to read. And the other thing that's reflected as well is how significant a part Suze played in his development, and having someone he could rely on in New York City, and show him a wider world of art, and have him experience insights that he hadn't even thought he was pursuing through classic modes of expression, basically. So I am going to read that now to close it out. And this is from page 272 of Chronicles. Starting on page 272 of Chronicles, going to about 276. Hope you enjoy. My perspective on all that was about to change. The air would soon shoot up in intensity and become more potent. My little shack in the universe was about to expand into some glorious cathedral, at least in songwriting terms. Suze had been working behind the scenes in a musical production at the Theatre Delay on Christopher Street. It was a presentation of songs written by Bertolt Brecht, the anti-fascist Marxist German poet-playwright whose works were banned in Germany, and Kurt Weill, whose melodies were like a combination of both opera and jazz. Previously, they had a big hit with a ballad called Mac the Knife that Bobby Darin had made popular. You couldn't call this a play. It was more like a stream of songs by actors who sang. I went there to wait for Suze and was aroused straight away by the raw intensity of the songs: Morning Anthem, Wedding Song, The World Is Mean, Polly Song, Tango Ballad, Ballad of the Easy Life. Songs with tough language. They were erratic, unrhythmical, and herky-jerky. Weird visions. The singers were thieves, scavengers, or scallywags, and they all roared and snarled. The entire world was narrowly confined between four streets. On the small stage, objects were barely discernible: lamppost, tables, stoops, windows, corners of buildings, moon shining through roofed-in courtyards, grim surroundings, creepy sensations. Every song seemed to come from some obscure tradition, seemed to have a pistol in its hip pocket, a club or a brickbat, and they came at you in crutches, braces, and wheelchairs. They were like folk songs in nature, but unlike folk songs, too, because they were sophisticated. Within a few minutes, I felt like I hadn't slept or tasted food for about 30 hours. I was so into it. The song that made the strongest impression was a show-stopping ballad, A Ship, the Black Freighter. Its real title was Pirate Jenny, but I didn't hear that in the song, so I didn't know what the real title was. It was sung by some vaguely masculine woman, dressed up like a scrubbing lady who performs petty tasks, goes about making up beds in a ratty waterfront hotel. What drew me into the song at first was the line about the ship, the Black Freighter, that comes after every verse. That particular line took me back to the foghorns of ships that I'd heard in my youth, and the grandiosity of the sounds had stuck in my mind. Seemed like they were right on top of us. Duluth, even though it's 2,000 miles from the nearest ocean, was an international seaport. Ships from South America, Asia, and Europe came and went all the time, and the heavy rumble of the foghorns dragged you out of your senses by your neck. Even though you couldn't see the ships through the fog, you knew they were there by the heavy outbursts of thunder that blasted like Beethoven's Fifth. Two low notes, the first one long and deep like a bassoon. Foghorns sounded like great announcements. The big boats came and went, iron monsters from the deep, ships to wipe out all spectacles. As a child, slight, introverted, and asthma-stricken, the sound was so loud, so enveloping. I could feel it in my whole body, and it made me feel hollow. Something out there could swallow me up. After I heard the song maybe a couple times, I kind of forgot about the foghorns and got tuned in to the point of view of the maid, where she's coming from, and it's the driest, coldest place. Her attitude is so strong and burning. The gentlemen who she is making up beds for have no idea of the hostility inside of her, and the ship, the Black Freighter, seems to be a symbol for some messianic thing. It's always getting closer and closer, and maybe now it's even got its damn foot in the door. The scrubbing lady is powerful, and she's masquerading as a nobody. She's counting heads. The song takes place in a hideous netherworld where soon every building, a flat one, the whole stinking place will be down to the ground, all except hers. Her building will be okay, and she'll be safe and sound. Later in the song, gentlemen begin to wonder who lives there. They're in trouble, but they don't know it. They were always in trouble, but never knew it. People are swarming near the docks, and the gentlemen are chained up and brought to her, and she's asked if they should be killed now or later. It's up to her. The old scrubbing lady's eyes light up at the end of the song. The ship is shooting guns from its bow, and the gentlemen are wiping the laughs off their faces. The ship is still turning around in the harbor. The old lady says, "Kill him right now. That'll learn him." What did the gentleman do to deserve such a fate? The song doesn't say. This is a wild song. Big medicine in the lyrics. Heavy action spread out. Every phrase comes at you from a 10-foot drop, scuttles across the road, and then another one comes like a punch on the chin. And then there's always that ghost chorus about the black ship that steps in, fences it all off, and locks it up tighter than a drum. It's a nasty song, sung by an evil fiend, and when she's done singing, there's not a word to say. It leaves you breathless. In the small theater where the performance reached its climactic end, the entire audience was stunned, sat back and clutched their collective solar plexus. I knew why it did too. The audience was the gentlemen in the song. It was their beds that she was making up. It was their post office that she was sorting mail in, and it was their school she was teaching in. This piece left you flat on your back, and it demanded to be taken seriously. It lingered. Woody had never written a song like that. It wasn't a protest or topical song, and there was no love for people in it. Later, I found myself taking the song apart, trying to find out what made it tick, why it was so effective. I could see that everything in it was apparent and visible, but you didn't notice it too much. Everything was fastened to the wall with a heavy bracket, but you couldn't see what the sum total of all the parts were, not unless you stood way back and waited till the end. It was like the Picasso painting Guernica. This heavy song was a new stimulant for my senses, indeed very much like a folk song, but a folk song from a different gallon jug in a different backyard. I felt like I wanted to snatch up a bunch of keys and go see about that place, see what else was there. I took the song apart and unzipped it. It was the form, the free verse association, the structure and disregard for the known certainty of melodic patterns to make it seriously matter. Give it its cutting edge. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this first edition of my album review series. I guess maybe I'll call it Boulevard Variety because I think I'm going to do movies too at a certain point. So thanks for tuning in. Looking forward to doing this in the coming months, and have a great day. And of course, read Chronicles, and you can never go wrong listening to Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Take care.